Welcome to rural Ohio. For many years throughout the 19th century, this was a real stronghold of the Universalist Church. And indeed, it's universal salvation that I'd like to speak with you about today, and specifically the connection between universal salvation and, believe it or not, history. For Universalist theology promises us that whatever offers us wholeness and a feeling of at-one-ment is freely available to all. But the fact of the matter is if we lose that invitation, we might lose a great deal of that wisdom and that feeling of spiritual fullness. And that invitation often comes to us through history itself. So just over the hill here is the Jersey Universalist Church that lost its invitation to universal salvation. The church was a thriving one throughout the 19th century and into the 20th. But when the merger between Unitarianism and Universalism happened in 1961, the church decided not to go with the Unitarian Universalist Association. Their understanding was that their Universalist identity was too precious to compromise in that way. And so they became an independent Universalist church. And for years, they did beautifully. They were served by a wonderful elderly minister who served that church until a ripe old age, when he died in the early 1990s. Well, guess what? In the 1990s, you couldn't find a Universalist minister that hadn't somehow been contaminated by the Unitarian heresy, and so that church went back to an age-old Universalist custom of ordaining from within the congregation. And again, all was well for many years. The lay people, the lay ministers served that congregation with a great deal of love and compassion. The worship services were good. The building was cared for. The community did a good job of caring for itself. But gradually something, the most precious something of all, the very notion of universalist salvation, was lost over time. With each layperson who was ordained, I would phone the church and invite a conversation about our relationship, about Unitarian Universalism, about the history of Universalism in Ohio. The first layperson I talked with was excited to know more about Universalism and asked a lot of curious questions. But by the time of the fourth ordained lay minister, this curiosity about Universalism was gone, and finally, the last I heard of that church, they are actually preaching a doctrine of hell and damnation from inside that building that reads Jersey Universalist Church. So that's the bad news. But here's the good news. When we deliberately place ourselves in the stream of a living tradition, we have access to a tremendous understanding and a feeling of belonging and wholeness and maybe even wisdom itself. Consider this one more story from our Universalist past. It's about John Murray. Perhaps you've heard his oft-quoted words that appears in the hymnal, the Singing the Living Tradition. It goes to the effect of go out on your highways and your byways and give people something of your vision. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Well, guess what? We now know that those words were not ever spoken by John Murray. But there's a silver lining to this particular cloud. Those words were spoken inside of a class on Universalist history that was held at Tufts University in the 1950s. Part of the class assignment was to imagine what the zeitgeist, what the spirit of history would have said to John Murray. And in that classroom, under the guidance of Professor Alfred Storer Cole, that class came up with those words, and then somewhere along the line, it was lost track that those words belonged to the class, and they were attributed to Murray because they seemed so profound and so moving. I love this story. I love that the words are not Murray's, but actually belong to the class. And the reason I love that is that I truly believe that when you put yourself in relationship to a living tradition, when you put yourself in relationship to history, you have access to a kind of wisdom that you would not otherwise have. I love that those words that seem so wise belong to everyone, belong to anyone. And that is exactly what we have when we do allow ourselves to be informed by this thing that is so much greater than anything self-derived, a living tradition. So I hope you indeed go forward with hope, courage, and not hell. And I hope you embrace whatever living tradition speaks the loudest to you.